Hi, folks. Steve Urban here, founder and CEO at Riderflex. We hope you enjoy today's podcast. And as a reminder, please subscribe to the Riderflex show for updates on new episodes. And by the way, if you haven't already, check out the book we recently launched, The Riderflex Guide, Inspiring and Hiring, available for purchase on Amazon. And now, a quick word from our sponsor.
Try the #1 marketing platform for small business. Everything you need from design to marketing to CRM. Learn more at marketing360.com. Marketing 360. Fuel your brand.
Jamie Cutler on the Riderflex podcast. Good morning, Jamie. How are you?
I'm wonderful, Steve. Thanks for having me on today. I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, man. Pleasure. I'm looking forward to getting into it, and we'll get into air methods and talk all about it. By the way, for the listeners, it's airmethods.com. We'll get into that, but I want to know about Jamie first. I was intrigued right away because both of my sons wrestled in high school, so we were a quote wrestling family, if you will. And I know you wrestled in college, so we don't have to make it a wrestling podcast, but obviously I want to talk about all that.
Yeah. You bet. Well, I mean, it was a significant part of my life growing up, and then obviously it got me to college, and that's a good thing. And you know, it's one of those things that just builds a lot of character, which is a great thing.
It's true, right? It really does. I've met very few wrestlers or wrestling families that don't have just strong morals, ethics, character, grit. I mean, there's a bunch of words in there.
Yep, it's all that. It really does. I mean, it's not a sport. You know, it's interesting because it's a sport that's got the single, because you're out there by yourself against one other guy. So you've got that kind of man on man, but it's a team sport too, because obviously you win titles and such. So, but what's interesting about it, I think that's different than a lot of sports is, it's just you. So when you lose or when you win, you walk away and you can't blame it on the guy next to you, on the football line, or the, guy who missed the 3-pointer, who lost. And so, it builds a lot of personal character is really the best way to describe it. And you have to look in the mirror a lot, which I think is one of the benefits of that sport.
No doubt.
It really teaches you a lot about yourself.
And did you play football as well in high school?
I did. I actually played football in college for a year as well.
Wow.
I almost played football exclusively. I happened to come from a football family. My grandfather played pro, as did two of my uncles.
Oh, cool.
So on my father's side. So, I have a little bit of football talent, which probably led to the wrestling talents as well. But wrestling just appealed to me more, frankly. They let me do it for a year, and then they kind of said, you got to choose. And Iowa State had just won the national title. And so there was really no choice for me. I could either be kind of a mediocre football player. I was a defensive end on a mediocre team, or started heavyweight for the best team in the country at the time. So that was a pretty easy decision for me.
Right. Yeah, no doubt about it. Was Gable the coach?
No, Gable left. So Gable wrestled at Iowa State, and then he was a grad assistant and became assistant coach. And he tried to get the head coaching job at Iowa State, but they wouldn't give it to him because there was a guy named Harold Nichols there at the time. So that's when he moved to Iowa. So when I was there, So when I was there, it was a guy named Jim Gibbons and a guy named Ed Bannock, who actually wrestled at Iowa. Those guys were the two. They were co-head coaches, interestingly enough. And Ed Bannock was the big guy coach. He was a 198-pounder. So he recruited me and was the reason. He was the primary reason I went to Iowa State, was because he was going to be the guy who trained me. And he was, he won a gold medal and 3 national titles. He was a stud.
Wow. I'm guessing you won did you win some state championships in high school?
Yeah. I wrestled for a high school called Dowling, which my high school wrestling coach retired at something like 371. So we lost one dual meet while I was in my high school history when he was the head coach. So wow. we won tons of titles, and we lost one dual meet during his entire reign. So we were kind of a powerhouse. So it was easy to wrestle there, and then sort of a natural path for me to go from there.
Your mom and dad spent lots of hours in the gym.
Yeah, that's right. I've got some memories about that, but I could tell that story, but we'll probably run out of time.
You know what? Yeah. I'll tell you what really quickly, then we can move into the other stuff. But I kind of miss the dads kind of form a little bit of a bond, because you're with these other parents all day
Yes.
long, all season, and
Yep.
several. I kind of miss that. There were several dads that I really connected with, and we spent all those years with them on the road, and
Yep.
I can't tell you how many times we'd be out in the camper over at the hotel, and we'd be outside taking a break and having some beers and doing some drinks, and my wife would be calling me, "Get your ass in here! He's up next. Stop messing around."
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because, my son doesn't wrestle, actually. He's a lacrosse player, which
Okay.
and it's the same thing. He's on travel teams and such. And his high school here in Colorado is quite good at lacrosse.
Uh,
So, I've made relationships with all those dads, and, you kind of go through seasons and such, and you get to be friendly with
oh,
with all of them. And so it's the same thing, right? I kind of, when he graduates, he's going into he's just finishing his junior year. So when he graduates, I'm going to miss all those
yep,
connections, just
yep,
exactly like you said.
yep. So
So
he's a junior.
he's a junior. Yep. He's
Okay.
a
You got
junior.
any other kids?
I've got a freshman in college, a daughter who's a freshman in college. And so, yeah, we're about to be empty nesters. I'm not sure what we're going to do.
It's an adjustment, my friend. I can tell you, I'm 55. All four of ours are out. Ours are like 28 to 32. And yeah, it is weird, especially when you spent all those years with the whole athletic stuff and the sports and activities.
Yeah.
It took Kim and I about a year before we kind of got into our own groove. And I started doing a lot more jeeping and camping and mountain stuff and some solo camping stuff, which I rarely did before. And it was weird. I'll tell you, there were many days you're kind of sitting at home, it's super quiet. You're like, wow, what do I do with my life now? I don't. It's
I don't have a
anytime.
tournament to go to. I don't have all day Saturday and Sunday. I don't have practices to get people to. Your free time. Somebody told me once your kids get, into and through college, your free time and your money go up exponentially.
Oh, no doubt. The amount of money Kim and I can live on is unbelievable. I mean, we just don't hardly spend anything. I was telling her
Right.
the other day, I'm like, wow, like how did we even deal? How did we manage with these four kids? And I don't even know how we did that. I don't know how we did it, but anyway.
Yep.
So you got a junior. Okay. Tell me. So you married? You still okay? Tell me how'd you meet your wife? Tell me about her.
Yeah. So my wife's got probably the more interesting story. I
Okay.
actually met my wife in Telluride, Colorado.
All right.
And I lived in Telluride in the sort of late '90s. After I got done with graduate school, I tried out for the '96 Olympic team, and then got hurt in the trials, finished third, and ended up deciding. My family was in resort management growing up, and my uncle had a place out on the West Coast, and I went out and worked for him after graduate school for a year. But I really wanted to be in the mountains, and so he had some connections, and I went to work for a resort management company in Telluride
I see.
that was based out of Telluride. They own ski and skis, and it was my first big job, really.
Okay.
They did sea and ski condo management across the U.S.
Uh-huh.
And so I ran their regional IT for the Western U.S. out of Telluride, believe it or not. My
How did
wife was
I don't want to go down that path maybe yet, but I was looking at what you majored in college, and I'm like, how did you get into IT? I don't understand. But look, we'll come back to that. Tell me about your wife.
great story as well.
Okay.
So she was the company controller, and she took them public. She moved to Telluride. She has the greatest story on the planet. She lived in Manhattan and was
Oh,
working for Hertz, and they offered her the number two finance job at Hertz. And she decided to take a vacation to see her cousin in Telluride before she decided she had to move to Orlando because that's where Hertz is kind of one of their big places are.
I see.
And so she got offered the job, went on vacation to Telluride, came back, and had this kind of epiphany that she decided she was, I don't know, 30 something. And she decided she didn't want to, she'd been in Manhattan for, I don't know, she went to NYU in grad school and then went to work for one of the big three, ended
Okay.
up at Hertz and decided she wanted to change her life. And so she turned the job down, and the CFO at Hertz at the time called it the biggest demotion in Hertz history because she turned the job down to be the number two person in finance at Hertz. And they got her a job working the rental counter at the Hertz counter at the Telluride airport. So she literally went from the number two job in finance at Hertz to work in the rental counter at the Telluride
Wow.
Airport. So
Wow.
they still tell that story. So she and I worked at the same company, and we got to be, she was kind of, a couple of years older than me, but a little different. So first couple of years we were just friends, and then we started dating, and that was it. And then we both moved to Denver about a year apart, and so we met down there, and been together ever since. 23 years now.
Oh, congratulations. What part of New York is she from? Because I'm just wondering, I mean, New York to Telluride, that's a different planet. Is she from Manhattan, or is she from upstate, or?
No, she's from upstate. She's from Rochester
Oh,
originally, and she went to Colgate, and then she went to graduate school at NYU, and then which is in Manhattan, and then she stuck around and went to work as a bankruptcy consultant for, I think, Ernst and Young at the time, and then was there. And so I just fortuitous. I happened to move there, and she happened to move there, and we met, and we've been together ever since.
very cool. Oh, very
Yeah,
nice. Good story. All right, very good. Thank you.
yeah,
How about your mom and dad a little bit, and any siblings? I wanted to just ask about them, if you don't mind. Yeah, tell me about them.
yeah. Only child. My parents were married for a very short amount of time, actually, after really I was kind of the reason.
Okay.
My mother passed away. Oh, she had kind of an unfortunate stroke about 10 years ago now, just a birth defect, actually. So she passed away about 10 years ago. My father's still alive, got some step siblings that I'm, familiar with, but not super close to,
Okay.
that he remarried and had a couple kids. He's still kicking in Des Moines, Iowa. And
And who,
so
which parent traveled, did all the wrestling travel and all that
that,
with?
that that was my mom. She was that's the greatest story. My favorite story about her is when I was in junior high, which is a little after I started wrestling. I was out on the mat in small town Iowa, because I kind of grew up right outside Des Moines and went to school sort of right at now it's a huge place, but at the time it was kind of a small town, and Des Moines grown into it. And so I was wrestling for this small school and wrestling this kid, and I was out there kind of beating him pretty bad. And my mom stood up in the middle of the audience and screamed at me, "Jamie, will you quit dancing with him and just pin him?" And I'll never forget that story, because people told that story about her for years and years and years. But she went to everything. She never missed a meet or anything, and she
Uh,
was a big supporter of mine. So
that's good.
she's probably the toughest human being I've ever met, still to this day. My mom. So she was
Very
a
good.
good model for me. Yeah.
She didn't so you didn't have to deal with any stepdads though. She never remarried.
She never remarried. I think she was, honestly, I hate to say it this way, but I mean, honestly, I was her, only child. I was, she was kind of focused on me. And so she never got remarried. Dated, but not a big deal. I don't think she wanted to introduce another person into that situation. So she was just there
Kudos.
for me.
Yeah, kudos to her if she's listening to us. Because yeah, I know to take a kid through the level of athletics that you went through high school and college, that takes a huge commitment from the
It
parents. And
it does, yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
and that was the thing, and I think that's probably you just hit on the note. You said she never remarried. She was dedicated to making me successful, frankly, and really who I am as a person today is greatly due to her, because
very
she had all the fortitude. She was smart. She was relentless. And she was dedicated to me. I mean, she put me in every damn lesson I can think of. I played every sport. I did,
good.
she made me, and then she made me go to art lessons and music lessons and all the stuff that every kid who plays sports hates. But she refused to not let me be well-rounded. And, who I am today is a reflection of who she was as a person. So,
Very cool.
and you did a great job of ferreting all the information out of me, because I don't talk about that a lot. But yeah, she really was, she was dedicated to raising her son right, and hopefully she did a good job.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. How does political science, major, what you moved, you go up to Telluride and they're like, hey, we're going to give you an IT job. How'd that happen?
Well, so I was going to be an attorney, because my family was in a bunch of small businesses, and one side was a law firm, and I thought, go be an attorney. Political science kind of leads you there.
I see.
But when I got into graduate school and I was a grad assistant for the wrestling team, I had this major professor, and I was always good with technologies kind of naturally, who had a triple PhD. He was computer science, statistics, and political science. And so I ended up doing a bunch of programming for him
Wow.
back in the original sort of R code on statistical data sets. He was doing political polling data set analysis, and so I was I worked at the computer lab in the summers and some part time when I could, from not being busy with wrestling, but I did in graduate school a lot because it was good at it. And but at the time, really, if you weren't going to be a programmer, there wasn't a track into IT, right? There was, you kind of, and I didn't really love programming, but I ended up doing it. And so, when I went to work for my uncle right out of graduate school, he needed somebody to do all of their technology, phone systems, and you name it. So I
I
did
see.
that for him.
Okay.
And I did that for a year. I just had a natural talent for it. And so, he made a couple phone calls when I moved to Telluride and got me the job. And it just sort of kept going. Everywhere I've been, I've just naturally been better at technology and and really, I think my skill set is not just technology, but the application of technology for business benefit. And that's probably one of the differentiators for me. And a lot of people is I'm not really technology for technology's sake. I
Mhm.
like technology, but I look at it, and I've always been good with it because I look at it like, how does it benefit the business that I'm working for? How do we apply it in a way that makes the benefit to the company either you know lower the cost, increase the profitability, those kind of things, and obviously any CEO is going to like that sort of mindset. So it's
And
always just because I grew up in family-owned businesses, and so for me it was a natural transition to say, well, we're not going to just put in technology and hope it works, and just because it's cool, we're going to go, well, what does it do for this business, and is that the right aspect for it? So that for me, that's kind of how I got into technology and how my career's progressed as well, is sort of that thought pattern is the best way to say it.
and then your leadership skills, your people skills, your communication skills pushed you into executive type positions and leadership roles pretty quickly as you moved along. I'm guessing that's what I figured happened.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think one of the things that sometimes folks in technology suffer from a little bit, and people get a
Yes.
natural path, right? Where they say, I either want to stay technical or I want to go into management,
Yep.
is they're not great with people. They don't have what
Absolutely.
I call, they don't have the EQ side of things.
That's right.
They're smart, but they're not good with people. And I think because I grew up in businesses that forced me to interact with people
Yep.
and did that from the time that I was very young. I remember working a cash register at a store in one of the properties we owned when I was 10, right? Because they didn't have, labor laws don't apply when you're, the son of the owners. So that was free labor. You end up
Yep.
working with people a lot, and honestly, that's one of the tricks to becoming a great leader, is really understanding people, because you don't run a technology group or run anything in a business by yourself. It's all about
That's right.
people, right?
Yep.
And so for me, that's the other side of the element, right? Is one, thinking about how technology is applied well, but two, how to lead and how to work with my peers and across the businesses that I've worked for, and also how to be what I kind of think of as sort of a steward leader, right? Because all the people that work for me, they're here because they believe that I can help them in their career, or that it's a good company to work for, or that I'm going to provide a good environment, and that I'm going to have their back in the way that allows them to be successful, which is success for the company, success for me, all those kind of things. And it's something I've learned, right? When I first started in management, I probably was a little harder than I am today.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
can imagine. I can imagine based on your background.
yeah, but you sort of learn, right? That what happens is, if you give people, nobody wants to fail. And if you give people good leadership and you give them a good sort of direction, they want to succeed no matter what it is, right? And so, I think that those are things that really, if I could talk to your audience and say, look, if you're looking for a career in technology management, what are the things to focus on? One, understanding, how to drive technology forward to the benefit of the business. Two, understanding the motivations of all your peers and
Yes.
what's going on with the company. And
Good.
three, understand how to enable your employees, the folks that work for you, and help them plow the road for them, right? So those are the lessons I've learned over the course of progressing in my career.
Boy,
Sometimes with a little blood on the steps.
out of the three you mentioned, the second one is a great point that a lot of people forget and don't bring up on the podcast. The motivation and thought process and feelings of your peers, the people that you need to bring along with you that may not technically report to you. That is an important piece that a lot of folks forget about.
That's right. Well, I mean, if you think about it, right? I mean, how you interact with, if you look at an average CIO or a CIO of most companies, you're going to interact with the head of operations, the head of HR, legal, right? All kinds of CEOs. You're going to interact with different people who have different, not only approaches, but different things they're trying to accomplish.
That's right.
So knowing where they're coming from, like what is their motivation, and it's not necessarily even a conscious motivation. Operations guys or girls and women are all focused on the same thing. They have to execute, right? And they need to do it quickly because they're held to those standards. Whereas somebody in sales, the head of sales, my current CEO was head of sales for 3M and GE at different times. Those folks have different motivations, right? They're trying to close deals. Yep. And so you have to be able to pivot and work with all those different kinds of people to be successful, because the motivations they have in needing technology is very different. Timelines are different. Kind of technology they want is different. So that's actually a key to success as well. And it's sort of the other side of the coin of knowing how your team operates.
That speech right there leads me to believe that you are headed towards a CEO seat at some point somewhere, whether it's Air Methods or something else, because that sounded like a CEO right there to me, not just a VP or a CIO, just so you know.
Well, I appreciate the thought.
Yeah.
We'll see. This life is long.
Very good stuff. So we don't have to touch base on, each stop along your career. Great career. And by the way, Jamie Cutler's on LinkedIn. You can tag him there. You can see all the details and stops that he had there. But let's kind of get into why don't we start with how you got to Air Methods? Was it a friend? Was it a recruiter? Did you know somebody? Talk to me about how it all came from. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was at QEP Resources, which was a spinoff of a company called Questar at the time. Questar was a big sort of, they're kind of Excel Energy, but a little more west. They do Utah and at the time they did Utah and Wyoming and little California and Idaho. They did natural gas to homes. What happened was they were a driller and a natural gas provider as well. And that was a division of the company. And they spun that. And I, moved it to Denver because honestly, that part of their company got so big that it got bigger than the parent. And so they created this sort of a new entity and spun it called QEP Resources. Okay. I got recruited in there and I was there for about 8 years. What happened towards the end of QEP is that we got two activist investors, one called Elliott Management, which if you pay attention to activist investors, Elliott Management's the one that just bought into Salesforce. And so they're big boys on the block. When they buy into you, they have your playbook. And really what they wanted to have QEP do is become a pure play provider. QEP had a midstream and we operated in 5 basins, and they wanted us to get rid of all those assets and focus just on the Permian Basin. Okay. And they had a lot of leverage. And so they kind of forced the company to divest a bunch of assets. And they tend to come in and they want to replace the CEO and they kind of take your board over. And so so I was there through all that transition. They put in retention agreements and we all stuck around to kind of do a couple-year transition, which was the last couple of years. And about that time, actually, the Air Methods job just happened to come along towards the end of my tenure at QEP. Recruiter, and they were looking for somebody who'd done transformational IT. And really by that word is thrown around a lot. Really what they wanted was somebody who could come in to an environment that had underinvested in IT, didn't really have a great, sort of group of people that were forward and business thinking, who had built those environments. And really at both MarkWest and QEP, that's why I'd been brought in, was in both situations for different reasons. They had not invested enough IT and they hadn't brought it forward enough. And they were really looking for somebody at both of my previous companies to hear that could come in and, build up the technology, make it forward looking, align it with the business most importantly, and make sure that the people that were there, really were thinking not just at the CIO role, but at every level
Yeah.
about how to make the business better. And so they wanted that experience. And the company had been taken private a couple of years prior to that. And when when it was taken private, the owner looked at it and said, "Yeah, we just don't see what we need to in the technology front, and we
Okay.
think that'll be a crutch, or sorry, that'll be a something that needs a crutch down the road if we don't hire the right leader." So they looked
Hmm.
for somebody who had that background. And the timing was right, for an exit from QEP to come here. And I like a couple of things I really liked about Air Methods. One, the mission. We save people's lives for a living. I mean, we are air ambulance. So if you've got somebody who's ever been transported by helicopter or fixed wing because they were injured or they were in a life-threatening situation, it was likely us. We're the largest one in the country. We have about 300 locations, 5,000 employees, and what we do for a living is transport people who are in urgent care crisis, either from hospital to hospital or from scene of accident to hospital. So literally, most of our employees save people's lives for a living.
Which is
And
pretty cool. I mean, yeah,
yeah, it's a great mission. You can't not love it, right? So that, and the company was successful, and there was an opportunity to come in and do what I really like to do, which is how do I add value to that by hiring the right people, rebuilding the technology environment, and moving it forward. And so the opportunity to come in and do that, and to help serve sort of the company mission, which is again saving people's lives. Our CEO writes a weekly blog, sends it out to the whole company, and one of the things she talks about is whose life did we save this week. So she gets a
I
story
love that.
from our field every week, and she sends it out that says, "Look, here's my story of the week about what happened in this situation," and and so it's kind of a cool place to work from that perspective. And so for me, the transition to QEP was natural because I got to work at a cool place and I got to do what I love to do, which is leverage the technology side to make the company better.
So Air Methods is owned by a PE firm
Yes,
called American Securities. Is that correct? Okay.
that is correct. Yep, PE firm out of New York. Good firm. They do this for a living. They took them private, I think, in 2017, if I remember correctly. That was prior to me, but they were public prior to that, and so PE firm bought us, and so we're privately held.
If they bought it in 2017, boy, you're coming up on the 5-year mark, and I know the timeline for PE firms. So are they acquiring others? I don't know how much you can talk about or how much you can share. Are they going to flip it? Do you know what I mean? I know you can't tell me the top secret plan, but I just know generally how PE firms and timelines work.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly an eye to an exit. What that exit looks like and the timing on that, I can't really talk about. But you are correct that PE firms have a generally a 7-year hold is the American Securities kind of time frame. But
Okay.
sometimes they hold companies longer, sometimes shorter. It just depends on how the company's doing. So, for these guys, we don't, we're just kind of rolling along, and you're right about that. Your insight into PE firms, but the timing on that is something I really unfortunately can't talk about.
Understood.
Yeah.
And I also know that when PE firms did they buy the whole thing, or
Yes, they're sole owner.
they're sole owner? I got you.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Very good. Did they bring in the CEO too that you mentioned? Did they bring in?
So it was real interesting. When I got hired, there was a guy named Steve Gorman who actually sits on American Securities board. But Steve's got, he's one of those heavy hitter guys. He was the COO at Delta before he retired. And well, actually, he was the COO at Delta. He was the turnaround guy at Delta, and then he was the CEO at Borden for a much of years. Then he kind of retired, and American Securities put him on the board. When they bought Air Methods, because of his airline background, they asked him if he'd kind of come in and run it because the old CEO retired. The guy was running it when it became private. So Steve
Gotcha.
was here for a couple of years to just sort of transition it into private equity and sort of optimize it. And then our head of sales at the time was a woman named Jalen Williams, who had worked at, as I mentioned, 3E or 3M and GE as head of sales for a lot of their medical and other areas. Fabulous leader. And so she was here as head of sales. And she became Steve's successor because he was here for a year, just to kind of, it's very common for PE firms to replace leadership.
No doubt.
So, yep. So she's been the CEO for a couple of years now.
Okay.
And she's presided over some really fantastic results, and she's a people first leader, is the best way to describe her.
Very good. And how many employees now for Air Methods?
A little over 5,000.
5,000 total. Okay, very good. And can you, for the listeners that might be curious, what's the business model? I mean, do you get paid by insurance companies, by the hospitals? I've never quite understood the model. I always see the helicopters and the rescue teams, and I'm like, okay, well, that's a different company. So how does that work? I don't know. Can you give us the commoner version here so we understand?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something I had to learn when I got here because I didn't know this business model either. So think of it as just like you go see your doctor, right? You go see your doctor, that's a provider. The provider, your doctor, bills the insurance company, and then the insurance company, you pay some portion of that, and then the insurance company pays the rest of it. So we get paid by basically by insurance companies. Now we also get paid by Medicare, Medicaid, by the government. So effectively, because we're an urgent care provider, we don't get to ever turn somebody down. Not that we would, but that's part of the gig. So we don't know when we pick up a patient if they have insurance, if they don't, if they're Medicare, Medicaid, what their insurance carrier is. So we actually have a billing arm in California called Patient Billing Systems. That effectively what happens is after we do the transport, then Patient Billing Systems has traditionally been an advocate for our patient to either get insurance reimbursement, and we're about 80% in network with insurance providers, or get reimbursed by the government. The government, of course, being the government, is the lowest payer of everybody. So we actually we bill directly. We don't bill the patient. We bill on the patient's behalf to whoever the third party is, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, insurance provider, directly to the government, if it's like Veterans Administration or a government employee, et cetera. So we do that billing as well. So it's just like any other sort of healthcare type situation.
And you're legally held to the same laws that apply to emergency rooms. You basically have to help the person. Is that right? I mean, I know there's a law or some kind like that, I think. I don't know.
100% correct. If we go to the scene of an accident, we pick the person up and transport them, period. That's the end of the conversation. And we don't ask, we just, everything that we worry about as far as reimbursement is done after the fact.
Okay.
Right. And so, we about a third of our transports. So we do about 111,000 patient transports a year.
Wow.
Last year. And about a third of those will be what we refer to as scene of accident or scene of incident, where we're called to something where somebody's been injured or has a situation, whatever it might be, where they need urgent transport. And we do some ambulance transport, although it's a very small percentage. And then 2/3 of it is hospital to hospital. And typically what that is for us is somebody will go to a hospital, like a regional hospital, and they'll need some kind of care that can't be provided there. And so we will move them from one hospital to another to a tier 1 facility. So that's kind of how we work.
Do you contract out the pilot? Are the pilots employees? Are they contractors? And two-part question, do you own all the helicopters or are those leased? I'm just curious about all that.
Yeah, so those are excellent questions, and sort of insightful questions. We have 3 different models of how we do business. One is we will provide, for instance, for a hospital chain, let's say, pick your local hospital chain. We will partner with them and we will provide the helicopter and the pilot, and they will provide, every one of our flights has to have a minimum 1 clinician on board, right? So legally, we won't take off without that. So in some cases, and we call those hospital-based systems, we will partner with a hospital. We'll actually logo, and we have a couple other divisions within Air Methods. We have a manufacturing division where we paint helicopters, retrofit them, you name it. We'll take it just bare metal and we'll do all the work. That's called United Rotorcraft. That's out by Centennial Airport, and it's basically a manufacturing facility. So what we'll do is we'll partner with them. We'll logo the helicopter with their hospital name and all that, and we'll staff the pilots, and our pilots are all employees, so we don't contract any of those folks, as are the clinicians, and then they'll provide, in this case, the hospital oftentimes will provide the clinician, and we'll take off and land. That you see sometimes the heliport at the hospital, that's a hospital-based system. We also have what we call community-based systems, where it's all us. And so we just put a base because we know there's demand, and we will partner with the 911, the local fire, sheriff, no matter what it is, because those are usually rural, not always, but a lot of times rural or more suburban, for instance. And we'll just put a base there, and then we'll take calls from anybody. And we have a big call center in Omaha called Aircom, where all of our calls and all of we have electronic, requesting that goes on as well, that comes all from the fields, and we'll take all those to a central location and then dispatch, and then we monitor everything. We're under the same requirement as any FAA requirement. It's called Part 21, where we have to monitor every flight constantly, right? So, and we're 24/7, 365. So we have a flight monitoring in the base of our Denver office here, where we monitor every flight that's going on, across the United States, and we have about 300 locations across the U.S. And we operate, and in Hawaii too.
Are the call centers, so if I call 911, it goes to the 911 facility, and then the 911 facility routes it to your call center to dispatch the pilot? Is that right? Is that how that works?
It could be them. It could be the emergency services that show up. So in other words, it could be the 911 center, but they may not always know the level of care needed. So let's say that it's scene of accident. It might be the fire department that shows up, or a sheriff that shows up. They may actually just ask for dispatch. And in the case of the hospitals actually will request our dispatch. So if it's hospital transport, they will know, and they will basically request a dispatch. We have some electronic software we use as well, where they can just put in the information and request it. And then we will go to the hospital and pick up. So it's literally everything you mentioned and more. So we take it basically from anybody who needs care. And so our dispatch center, sometimes it's 911, sometimes it's fire department, hospitals. It varies across the country and across the situation as well. Helicopters are all owned by us. Some of them are leased, and some of them are outright owned. We've got a pretty large fleet, as you might imagine.
Why do you lease some and buy some? I guess does it just depend on availability or inventory, or why
It's all that. Sometimes the leases just turn into we own it, right? So that we might lease it for a certain amount of time, and then when it's done, the lease is over, and we just continue it's easier to maintain than buy a new one. So it varies across.
I'm curious. I'm assuming that is a depreciating asset as soon as you buy it. Is that like buying an RV and a car? As soon as you buy it, it's just doing this. It just does this.
It's a very depreciating asset. It's a very capital intensive business. Helicopters are, $10 to $20 million to buy, and then you have to maintain them. So our direct maintenance costs, and that's one of the things we've really done a great job of in the technology side, really providing insight into. They didn't know how much money they were really spending. It took a lot of effort to understand the maintenance costs and all those things. We've really automated all that and provided insight into it through some automation and software insights that we've provided. But it's a depreciating asset. So, effectively, that's why we normally lease, because there's no value in owning it. So we lease it, and then, sometimes the lease runs out and the helicopter still has useful life left, and you can continue to maintain them. And then, sometimes what we'll do is resell it if it gets to a point where we don't think it's useful for us, but somebody else might find it useful, and then we'll buy a new one. And a lot of times when we partner with hospitals, and we do a lot of partnering on Indian reservations and military bases, where we call those alternative delivery models, where it's very similar to the hospital-based system, but we may provide all of it, but it's only for their use. In other words, we'll go to a military base and we'll provide all the emergency rescue services for them, right? But it's contracted strictly to them. So we do all of that. And sometimes when we do those deals, they'll want a new helicopter as part of it, and then we'll just provide the helicopter lease as a part of that and bill it back to them.
Oh, I see. I see. How many helicopters do you have active?
Oh gosh, quite a few, maybe 400 or 500.
4 or 500.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay. Very good. You're. I'm trying to figure out yourself. The lady that's the CEO. What's her name?
Jalen Williams is her name.
She was the salesperson. What is she selling to the hospital? Is she going to a hospital organization and saying, "Hey, look, go with us for your air transportation versus ABC company"? Is that who she's selling to, or who is she
Correct.
selling?
It's everybody we mentioned. So a lot of hospital. We do a lot of big hospital partnerships, so that we're partnered with literally every large hospital chain in the country. So
Okay.
she's selling to those guys, because that's 2/3 of our transports, but
Okay.
also the communities as well. So in the communities that we service, she's not selling per se. It's more of a what I would just call a customer relationship manager at that point. But
Okay.
we still call them sales folks. They may go visit the local sheriff or the
Oh,
911 center
oh,
or whomever
I
does a
see.
lot of the dispatch in that
Ah,
particular area,
I see.
is who she would sell to. So it's all those things. A lot of the focus, you've hit it right on the nailhead, is the large hospital chains that we partner with,
Okay.
because we do so many transports for them.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out how is your competition trying to move in, and they're like, look, what's your contract with with their methods? How many when does it run out? And here's a better contract. I was just wondering what the competitive landscape is like.
It looks exactly like that. There's really only one other provider our size, and that's AMR GMR, which is
Oh,
also privately held. They're not quite as big on the flight side as us. They're more ground based.
okay.
But yeah, that's
Okay.
we're the two biggest. They're owned by BlackRock, and so there is a little bit of that. What happens is you tend to divide the country up, or that your area is up, and then we have a certain area and they have a certain area, and occasionally occasionally those contracts will come up and somebody will go, oh, I just want to try somebody new for a while, or we you
Yeah.
know we it's
Yeah.
it's a lot of that sort of
Okay.
insular passing around of that, but we always look for market share. In other words, if
Uh,
we think if
yeah.
we think we're operating in this county and the next county over, we think we can get some flights out of there, we might move a base 10 miles and
Okay.
try to get more transport. So we do a lot of that competitive analysis as well.
I'm envisioning a dark, smoky room with glasses of bourbon and several people sitting around the table, and some of them are from BlackRock and some of them are from American Securities, and they're having conversations.
Well, unfortunately, that couldn't happen because because we're the two biggest and we have such a huge share.
Okay.
We
Oh,
can't really.
can't do it.
The federal anti-competitive basically statute keeps us from
I
being
see. I see.
ever doing that. So
Oh,
we're truly, and there's a few smaller ones out there, but the market is very consolidated, I would argue.
yeah, it sounds like it is. Yeah, it sounds like it is. Here's two questions. I know we're getting towards the back end here. Two kind of outside the lines questions. I'm just curious about. Are you held to let's say there was a not a pandemic, but some other, I don't know, a meteor's headed towards the earth or something huge, right? A volcano, whatever. Does
Mhm.
the government agencies, does the state or anybody, do they have the power to say, I need your 500 helicopters to do this, and you have to like follow their orders in some sort of emergency act or something?
Actually, really no. So FEMA is the group that sort of manages all that, and what FEMA does is they contract that out. And
Okay.
so every 4 or 5 years, FEMA, like think about the hurricanes that have occurred.
Okay.
We will offer our helicopters up in emergencies, but
Okay.
FEMA actually has a contract with GMR AMR that they can mobilize theirs. So they pay air medical response, which is what AMR stands for. And they've got a contract with AMR. And basically, if FEMA activates them, then all of AMR's helicopters become dedicated to FEMA.
I
So
see. I
effective,
see.
so effectively, they do that in advance, more or less, but they
Okay.
do it via contract. So the way we operate, I suppose the federal government could theoretically do that with anybody, right? But that's not something they do. they will call us and ask us, and we have it, depending on the situation, dedicate, what we'll do is we'll say, look, we're not going to do any transports anyway. We'll absolutely dedicate a helicopter to this emergency response, and then we'll just do one-off contracts with those situations. But they won't. I'm trying to think of what that would really be. They won't come in and sort of take our helicopters from us. Okay. They have a contract with AMR to do that with them, though.
Okay, curious. Yeah. I've thought about you guys a few times. I go to the mountains in Colorado a lot and Wyoming, and I do a lot of solo stuff. And I'm 55. Doing solo when you're 55 is not always the wisest thing. So I have a SOS beacon, and I got a couple of devices where I can press a button and the helicopter comes or whatever.
Yep. That's actually interesting enough. That's not us. So that's typically a search and rescue. And so we have done a little search and rescue in the past, but it doesn't really, it's kind of a different thing than what we do. So search and rescues tend to be governmental, and they tend to have a dedicated helicopter somewhere that, like, it's county. It's county or state that typically does that. Now, what we do, which is interesting, we build Firehawks. So we just sold 2 of those to the state of Colorado, which are firefighting helicopters. So effectively, we have helicopters in both California and Colorado that will hover over a lake, put a siphon down in the lake, and suck the water up into a tank, and then go drop it on a fire. So our UR facility builds a lot of those. Which is pretty cool. Now, typically, again, we end up just, we just provide the helicopter to the state, and they fly them. But but we're the ones who build all those. Coast Guard helicopters, we build those as well.
I have a tech question for you. This is for a CIO of any kind. So, this Chat GPT, which I'm sure as a CIO guy, you played around with it, you know about it. Even as a recruiting firm, so our day job besides our podcast is a recruiting and staffing firm at Riderflex, and so we're playing around with it. How can it help us? Is this something the recruiters can use? Is this something we can use for social media posts, whatever? And so I as the CEO of Riderflex, I'm like, okay, let me see what this is. And so I start playing around with it. I'm like, oh, shit, okay, this is whoa. This thing can write code. This thing can I'm like, whoa. And my immediate thought, I want to get your opinion on ChatGPT overall, but 2-part question. My other thought was, as a recruiting firm, the most cocky candidates on the planet over the last 3 years have been software engineers because they're in such high demand. And I was thinking, as an executive recruiter, I'm like, okay, the days of software engineers being cocky might be coming to an end if this technology continues. So, yeah, just curious to get your thoughts as we wrap up here.
The way I look at this, and I have kind of a different view of it, is the human sort of species. If you look at the last 120 years of technology, what has been the driving force of what we use technology for? And it's been to take away and commoditize the things that the human race doesn't want to do anymore. Right. In other words, why do we keep pushing the boundaries of technology? Well, I don't want to vacuum, so now we've got robot vacuums, right? I don't want to, driving my car is boring, so now I've got cars that self-drive, or we're almost to that. Yeah. And so, really what we do as a species is we try to take away the things that we don't want to do, and we try to automate those in some way, shape, or form, right? That's what businesses do. That's been the driving force. This particular version of AI, and I'm not sure if I consider it to be truly AI as much as I consider it to be really advanced programming tool that has the ability to learn from its own mistakes, and maybe that's AI. I don't think we're at AI, frankly. I think what you're seeing is really advanced technology that takes away, to your point, the redundancy of software programming, right? Because what happens is most people, when they go to learn software programming, they learn how to do it, and it's done the same way. Why? Because that's best practice. And really what ChatGPT does is it in its programming sense, it's automating the best practices for 80% of it. It's the 80-20 rule, right? There's going to be 20% that the good software programmers stay around for, and the 80% of it that you go, I don't need that. I can have this automation tool do it. Well, that's the goal, right? And I think this is just another step in that goal. And so you're right. The days of the commoditized software programmer being overvalued for what they actually contribute are going to go away. And it's like everything else, right? It's like it's just reached that state, or it's going to continue to evolve into that state. And that's what I see these things doing is, the scary piece. And I think there's a lesson for all of us here is sometimes you have to go do those things just to flex the muscle and remember how to do them, because I don't want to do that, but every once in a while you got to vacuum the floor yourself, right? Just to get a little context in your life. So that's how I view it. I think it's gonna take away the commodity stuff, and there'll always be room for the top 20%, but the top 20% will be the top 20%, not the the guy who you recruit. You go, well, this guy's just kind of mediocre at software programming, but somehow he's making more money than everybody else. I don't understand. And I think that's where it's going to go, personally. That's my view of this.
Very good. Now your daughter's in college. Is she using it to write her papers? Did you ask her?
My daughter would, it's funny. My son probably would, but my daughter she would absolutely take that. She would consider that an insult if she thought that somebody could write a paper, that a semi-automated program could write a paper as well as she could. She'd be mad.
All right.
My son would look at it from the CEO perspective and go, well, that paper doesn't matter. I might as well let the tool do it.
Jamie, thank you very much, man. Really great interview, really insightful and thorough overview of the business and how your industry works. For the listeners, it is airmethods.com. Just one more time, Jamie Cutler, available on LinkedIn. Great overview, my friend. Appreciate you being on the Riderflex show and sharing your story.
Steve, it's been a true pleasure, and hope to stay in touch, and thank you for having me on.